we're going to begin our series on the upper lake. We are in the Narrows, heading west into the upper lake. Coincidentally, this is where our last video, titled The Narrows, left off. To our south is Old Channel Bay. While to our north is Carman's Bay. Carman's Bay is named for John Carman. A surveyor from Ohio, John came to the area in 1853 and staked out claims for his family in Orono and Spring Park. Much of Casco Point, then called Carman's Point, was part of his claim. Carman's Bay is most notable for the 4 bays or inlets that offer extended lake access for many of its residents. The first one is on the east shore of the bay, just north of the Narrows. This inlet is very recognizable because it can be clearly seen from County Road 19. An interesting urban legend grew to epic proportions during the construction of this house in the late 1970s. While it was going up, a rumor began to grow locally that movie star Paul Newman was building it so he could be closer to Brainerd International Raceway, where he raced cars. One acquaintance of mine even said she saw him shopping at Rick's Super Value in Navarre. Of course, none of this was true. Even if Mr. Newman wanted to do this, BIR is over 100 miles away. Certainly Gull Lake would have been a better site for such an undertaking. When the house was finished and the new owners moved in, they had to put a sign in the front yard stating that Paul Newman doesn't live here, because they were having issues with peeping Toms. So there you have it. Conspiracy theories even existed in the 1970s, long before the internet. The second inlet is about halfway up the eastern shore of Carman's Bay, while the third one is way up in the northeast corner. Let's check out the third inlet. What many people don't realize is how close this part of Carman's Bay is to Navarre. Let's take the drone up for a look. And there we have Navarre, a mere stone's throw away from the bay. You'll see many boats around here claiming Navarre as their home port. However, Navarre is unincorporated and is more of a neighborhood than it is a town. All of Navarre, as well as all of Carman's Bay, are within the city limits of Orono. The final inlet is on the other side of Carman's Bay, in the middle of Casco Point. Let's shoot across the bay and have a look. None of these inlets have channel markers. However, the one over by the Narrows that we first looked at used to have them. This one seems to have a point marker nearby, as it is pretty shallow on this side of Carman's Bay. There must be some underwater structure jetting out into it. This inlet goes into the center of Casco Point. Casco Point used to be called Carman's Point because John Carman was its first European settler. Sometime in the 1880s, people began referring to it as Casco Point after the village of Casco Bay in Maine. I'm not sure who was responsible for this. Casco Point lies between Carman's Bay to its east and Spring Park Bay to the west. We are now traveling down the western shore of Carman's Bay along Casco Point. Our next destination, directly across from here, is Lock Point on the south shore of the lake. Lock Point is the site of Clay Cliffs, a gated community of 18 homes in Tonka Bay. It was named after W.H. Locke, who moved here from Cincinnati. It was originally called Lithgow's Point after William Lithgow, who drowned there in a boating accident in 1854. In 1871, Peter Gideon bought the property to expand his apple orchard. In 1889, Fred B. Snyder, an attorney and Minnesota state senator, purchased a 20-acre peninsula, and in 1910 built a stately home on the property. Today, the lions at the gate of Clay Cliffs are all that's left from Snyder's mansion. Also along this shoreline was Wildhurst, which was the western terminus of the Twin Cities electric streetcar lines. Here, passengers would transfer from rail to streetcar boats to continue on to Spring Park, Mound City, and Zumbra Heights. At the base of the peninsula is Crescent Beach, a swimming beach maintained by the city of Tonka Bay. Now let's head back up to Casco Point. One of the most recognized landmarks on the upper lake is the Bishop Boathouse on the southern shore of Casco Point. General Judson W. Bishop was a St. Paul native and Civil War veteran who built a cottage and guest house on the property in 1884, and this beautiful boathouse the following year. The two-story Victorian boathouse stood for 140 years until gravity and deteriorating footings began to win out. I was horrified a couple years ago to discover that they were tearing it down. I do have to admit, though, even though it isn't an exact replica, they did a pretty good job erecting its replacement. As we round the corner past this point marker, we head up the western shore of Casco Point and enter Spring Park Bay. Originally called Byers Bay because William Byers owned about 156 acres here in the 1850s. Spring Park Bay is named after the community that graces its north shore. The city of Spring Park got its name because of the natural springs found here. Spring Park Bay is 378 acres, located between Casco Point in the east and Phelps Island in the west. The cities of Orono, Spring Park, and Mound make up its shores. Near the northeast corner of the bay is the former home of Gary Marquette, the state director of Buglers Across America. Gary played taps on his deck every night at sunset. We did a video about him on this channel last year. Gary moved to a new home on West Arm, but you can still hear him play taps on weekend nights from the balcony of the yacht club here on the bay. Many businesses have occupied this little strip mall over the years, including a rib joint and a shop that rented kayaks and paddleboards. Currently, Van Restaurant offers fine dining. On this site in the 1970s was the Soda Fountain, which was sort of a 50s style malt shop. There are docks across the streets for some of the businesses. Next to this is the Mist Condominiums, luxury apartments with a great view of the lake, built on the former site of the Hotel del Otero. Built in 1885 by James J. Hill, it was a destination until 1945 when it burned down. The next occupant of the property was the MInnetonka Mist. The Mist was a bar and restaurant with a patio on the roof. It was a great spot to watch the goings-on at the boat ramp across the road. The Spring Park boat ramp is one of the busiest on the lake. The only downfall is its lack of parking. However, there is an overflow lot provided by the county about a block east. Next to the boat ramp is the home of the Hennepin County Water Patrol. Their fleet of boats patrol the lake from ice out in the spring until the beginning of winter. They also use airboats and other equipment to patrol the ice in the wintertime. Next to the sheriff is the Yacht Club Professional Building. This is where Gary Marquette moved his taps playing to. The Yacht Club is currently undergoing a change. It's being converted to the Yacht Club Hotel and Marina. It will be the first new hotel on the lake since the Del Otero burned down almost 80 years ago. In the northwest corner of the bay, we find the channel going into Black Lake. Everything south of this channel is on Phelps Island. The channel is also the border between the cities of Spring Park and Mound. Following the western shore of Spring Park Bay, we arrive at Lake Winds. Lake Winds has been my home for the past 16 years. Built in the 1880s, the Maple Heights Inn was managed by James and Amanda Woolnough up until the 1920s when it was sold and renamed Camp Tippy-Wacken, a Christian-affiliated club. The building was torn down in 1964, and in 1967 the current Lake Winds facility was built. Originally called Tippy-Wacken in honor of the old religious camp, it converted to condominiums in the 1980s and became Lake Winds Yacht and Sport. It's made up of 190 condos, 2 swimming pools, a gym, a racquetball court and a basketball court, and a 43-slip marina. Just to the south of Lake Winds is Pelican Point Homeowners Association. Named for Pelican Point, which is actually an island and is situated just offshore. It was a peninsula before the lake was raised by the Grays Bay Dam 100 years ago. Just south of Pelican Point is Wild Goose Chase Island. Goose Island was purchased by Edward Reed in 1883, who built this home on the 1-acre island. Today the island is vacant and operated by the Three Rivers Park District. In the 1970s and 80s, we used to camp on the island. In the 1990s, overnight camping wasn't allowed anymore. The fire rings are still there, but in the summertime it stays light past 9 p.m. and the park closes at 10, so they don't get a lot of use. As we pass through the channel between Goose and Phelps Islands, we leave Spring Park Bay and enter Phelps Bay. Situated between Phelps Island and Enchanted Island, Phelps Bay is 345 acres with 3.7 miles of shoreline. It was named for a banker named Carrington Phelps, who developed much of Phelps Island. Island Park was an incorporated village on Phelps Island with its own fire department and city hall. In 1960, it voted to merge with the city of Mound. The village hall still stands in the middle of the island. Across the bay, Enchanted Island was originally named McCormick's Island, after resident Sam McCormick. White settlers began calling it Enchanted Island because the Dakota used to have ceremonies and medicine dances there. In 1971, Bonnie Raitt recorded her debut album on Enchanted Island. This boat launch on the southwest tip of Phelps Island is actually in MInnetonka. The ramp is rarely ever used, and there isn't much room for parking in this residential neighborhood. The channel between Phelps Island and Enchanted Island is named Zimmerman Pass, after Charles Zimmerman, a photographer who built this cabin in 1877 called Boulder Lodge. He later owned the Belle of MInnetonka and the City of St. Louis steamboats and operated a drawbridge across Zimmerman Pass. This concludes part 1 of our series on the Upper Lake. Look for part 2 coming soon. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.